Hey guys, Glenn and Alyssa Azar here, and we're quite proud to be a part of the SAMP Community Week. Obviously, we're all going through some really tough times at the moment, so we thought we'd share some of our experiences that hopefully will help you overcome some of the challenges that you're experiencing at the moment. So I'll kick off with myself. I spent 17 years in the Australian Army. I started out as an infantry soldier, but I specialised in aviation medicine. So I did a nursing degree. All of my deployments were spent doing medical evacuations in Iroquois and Black Hawk helicopters. Through that, I learned a lot about what humans are actually capable of. Experiences I went through overseas, watching a patient come into us, rowing a boat for 5 hours after being stabbed in the chest and collapsing a lung. And I had young soldiers that would say to me, how could someone row 5 hours in a boat? And I told them the other option is to just die. And in that situation, we were the only medical facility within anywhere on the island that we're on in the North Solomons. I had a woman that walked 40 kilometres with a broken foot, and she was 38 weeks pregnant to come and see us. Again, what else do they do? I had a guy that got shot 3 times with an M16, and we were giving him Panadol as pain relief post-operatively, a local guy. So what I learned at a very young age is that humans are incredibly resilient when we have to be. Sadly, a little bit in Australian society, I feel like we've lost that, or in Western society across the board, and mostly because over the last 5 or 10 years, life has been quite comfortable. So some of the stuff we'll talk about today is just about overcoming those challenges, how to build resilience and mindset yourself so that you can not fall victim to, I think, what is a bit of a scourge in Western society that is really coming to show itself in this current COVID crisis and any crisis that we may experience. Once I got out of the Army, after 17 years, I started my own businesses. So I run Adventure Professionals, which we do trips to Kokoda Track, Everest Base Camp, Mount Kilimanjaro. We go to Russia and all around the world. Again, I've experienced a lot taking 8-year-olds to 79-year-olds across the Kokoda Track and everyone in between. I've taken single and double leg amputees, and yet I've watched 30, 35-year-old relatively fit guys and girls struggle. Again, to me, that only says that it's the mindset that's different, because they must be more physically capable than some of the other people that I've taken across the track, and that's the importance of mindset. I'm still running that business now. We do a lot of mindset coaching, a lot of resilience work with companies from Telstra right down to single operators and even working with some teenagers. We present to schools trying to build this mindset and resilience into teenagers, into young adolescents, because they are the next generation of Australians coming through. So to try and nip in the bud the problems that we see today, I guess, out in our age groups. And we own a gym here in Brisbane as well. So that's kind of the whole gamut of what we do. I run a podcast called the Building Better Humans Project. I've been running that 5 years now. Again, it's just around mindset and all of this sort of stuff. iTunes, Spotify, if you want to check it out. So I'll pass over to Alyssa to tell you a bit about her experiences, and then we might talk a bit about resilience, mindset, etc.
Yeah, so I'm Alyssa Azar. I am the youngest Australian to ever climb Mt Everest, which I did when I was 19. And how that all came about was because my dad was leading Kokoda trips. I got into bushwalking quite young, so most of my weekends from the age of 6 onward, I would go and join my dad and the clients he was getting ready to take across the Kokoda Track, and I would just join in their local training sessions and just love them. So it became the highlight of my week, and it didn't take long before I said, well, maybe I could go to Kokoda. I was training for it. I knew a lot of people who had done it, and it kind of fascinated me, so I wanted to go and have this experience for myself and got the opportunity to do that. But the standard was set when we had a conversation, and my dad said to me, you're going to have to follow the same training as anyone else. You're going to train for a year. You have to do 3 sessions a week, because that's the standard required of anyone wanting to cross the Kokoda Track. It was quite a lot longer, but because of my age and I didn't have the background or experience of most people. But in August of 2005, I got to cross the Kokoda Track in Papua New Guinea. So 8 days, 96 kilometers, very, very steep terrain, but it was definitely a life-changing experience. So that was kind of my introduction into adventure, and that process alone taught me so much about resilience. It showed me what I'm actually capable of, and it showed me how to apply that, especially with understanding that it doesn't come easy, and if it's going to be fulfilling, it won't come easy. It came at the end of a very long process where I had to learn a lot about myself. So that was a really influential point in my life and really gave me the blueprint on how to achieve my future goals. I realized I could apply that process and that mindset to pretty much anything. So every couple of years we would then try and take on another trek somewhere. So that was Everest Base Camp 2 years after I did Kokoda. And then it was the Aussie 10 peaks. So the 10 highest peaks here in Australia, all in Kosciuszko National Park. And it was 2 years after that I did Mount Kilimanjaro. So I did that when I was 14, and at the time that was my biggest challenge. I'd never been to that sort of altitude, so that had a pretty big impact. But it was actually around that time that I decided I'm going to climb Mount Everest, and I actually wanted to put a plan in place to do that. I sort of dreamt about that, but I always sort of saw it as a someday goal, and now it was actually going to happen. So I didn't know how long that was going to take. I knew that I certainly wasn't at the level required when I started that process, but I believed I had what it took. I believed I wanted it bad enough, and so started putting in all the right things around me to try and help sort of that goal happen, and that included finding the right mentors, but also just mentally and physically being willing to take myself to another level. So yeah, in 2016, after 2 attempts on the mountain, I successfully reached the summit of Everest on my 3rd attempt. So the first 2 were cancelled due to natural disasters, which was a huge setback after years of training to get there and not even be able to climb. So that was quite mentally taxing as well. But I overcame that, and I got to successfully summit the world's highest mountain. So since then, I've done it again from the other side of the mountain. So I've climbed Everest twice, and that's kind of my history.
So guys, I think there's a lot that we can unpack through both of our stories, but particularly through Alyssa's, and one that she was building this mindset at such a young age, which shows me that anyone can do this, but also the younger that they're doing it, obviously the easier it is to build that mindset because they're learning something new. As adults, or as we get older, we start to get fixed in our mindset, and a lot of us, a lot of you listening, could be stuck in that, particularly at this current point in time, but you can challenge that, and you can certainly change that if you're willing to. So the importance to me, the things I want to cover off on today is resilience. Often when we need resilience is not the time to try and build it. We build resilience by getting ourselves uncomfortable over time. So if you're really struggling right now, if you're just not where you want to be mentally, if there's currently being sort of put off with, particularly if you're in Victoria, but even slowly creeping up the eastern seaboard, they're closing off borders and we're opening and closing businesses. That is challenging. Like, I won't deny that. It's certainly been challenging for us. But if you're constantly finding that is beating you down and you can't pull yourself out of it, I would say that you haven't built enough resilience in the last 4 or 5 years. So with Alyssa climbing Everest, we were trying to build physically, but also build mentally over a series of years to get her ready for those setbacks. Now, none of us wanted the setbacks. She didn't want them. You and I don't want them now in our businesses, but we know that we're able to handle them because of the work that we did. Like, would you think that's fair in your Everest process?
Absolutely. I think I also saw that on the mountain when I got to Everest, and you could just tell the difference in other people's mindset and how they prepared, and certainly how I had prepared, and that highlighted for me how well that process had been thought out. Because I was training for the worst case scenario to be able to handle anything, rather than going in blind and hoping that we get the summit and then not being able to handle the realities of that environment. So you definitely have some sort of dreamlike moments up there, but they come off the back of being so well prepared. And for me, that was working with different mentors and people who would put me outside of my comfort zone intentionally to see how I would respond to that, because you are going to get that thrown at you no matter how good you are. That's going to happen to everyone at some point.
So the other parallel there is when Alyssa wanted to climb Everest, I didn't want her to think about just being on the top of Mount Everest. Mm-hmm. And I experience this with businesses. We open a business and we think it's all going to be smooth sailing. We've got the best customer service, the best product, people are going to want this thing. But there are a lot of things that happen underneath that. So if the only thing that you view as success is standing on the top of the mountain, or the only thing you view as success is opening your business and the doors being knocked down, then everything that happens under that becomes failure. Mm-hmm. and becomes really hard to bounce back from. So with those setbacks on Everest, there are some people that might have went over there, had that initial setback, and forever given up on that dream as a result. There might be some of you or I or people that we know that have started businesses, and when people didn't knock down our doors, or when challenges like this happen that seem unfair to us, we can go, well, let's just pack it in. For me, that's not how I operate. So I'm working hard to maintain what we do in our business. I'm someone that would have to be dragged out of this place as opposed to just walking away because it all gets too hard. So it's about having resilience. So if you find yourself wanting now, work out what can you do going forward not to have this problem again in the future, if this ever was to happen again or anything like this. So that's number one. And I get that this is a global thing that we've never experienced before, but you can build a mindset around that. The second thing I wanted to talk about today is actually mindset. So, and I call this the psychology and physiology of excellence. So how this normally plays out is, what would someone who is psychologically or physiologically excellent at something do? How would they perform? But how that also works is that you need to be preparing yourself across what I call being whole in your approach across all gamuts. So you need to be physically healthy. You don't have to be an athlete, but you have to be physically healthy even to carry out business, because there's strong psychological ties to mental health and physical health. Then you also need to be educating yourself. You need to constantly be learning. You get to that stage where you think you've finished learning and the world sort of overtakes you. So I guess for Alyssa, if you could talk to the importance, because everyone asks about how do you train for Everest. Well,
yep.
There's a physiological side, of course, but then, which everyone knows about, but the mindset side, I think, was equally, if not more important.
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of parts to that, but you're right, I didn't just view success as the summit alone. For me, it was about that, I guess, excellence. It's about bringing that every single day. So it was as important to me to bring that from, climbing from base camp to camp 1 as strong as I could. And I did want to embody that person I wanted to become. So for me, the goal was about, I guess, sort of representing a higher standard that I wanted to achieve. And so then you embody that in everything that you do. So that was kind of the goal for me. And we did that a lot in training. But yeah, there were a lot of different methods. So I would get, run through real-time scenarios where I would work with a mentor, and we're about to do a really challenging physical section, but he would say to me, I want you to imagine that there's a climber an hour ahead and they need your help and you need to move as quickly as possible. And so that puts it into that real context now of like, there's someone actually relying on me to perform. So everything, the level just kept getting raised in all of my training, physically, but also mentally.
I remember I was at an event once and someone asked Alyssa about, like, why didn't you quit? Why didn't you just stop after those couple of missed attempts? And I remember you had said to them, because I just thought someone who successfully summits Mount Everest doesn't quit. They wouldn't quit, and that's who I want to be.
Yeah.
So that's
absolutely.
kind of the same.
And I think that's why it is incredibly challenging, but also worth it, because I think it raises the standard in every aspect of your life. People almost think either you reach it by chance or you turn it on when, the summit's there. But you have to embody that all the way along if you're going to get a shot at the summit and get to stand there. So that's kind of that representation that you are that person. But that's because I know I've lived to that standard for years now. I've got the right habits. That's what gives you confidence on the mountain. So yeah, it's definitely, that's why I didn't quit. And it was funny to me when people wondered why I didn't, because it didn't occur to me to quit. I knew it was a setback, but I also knew, again, like, this is the person I want to be, and that's not how that person would react to that situation. So you realize that you get a choice. You get to choose how you react to circumstances outside of your control. And I knew that that was totally going to change the direction of my story. And it could be a failure, or it could be that was one of my attempts before I actually succeeded. You get to choose.
And that works for you guys as well. So, the businesses and the people that survive, and not only survive but thrive at the other end of this, are going to be the more resilient, the people who are willing to just keep turning up no matter what, even on the tough days, so that eventually this will end and the government and everyone around the world will try and right the ship. And those of us who are ready for that, I think, are going to have stronger businesses at the other end of this, because we've been found wanting in areas and we get to fix those up, and that's true of all of us. One of the things I really focus on teaching people now is what I call focusing on the win, so the WIN, which is what's important now. So when you're really struggling, when you just don't know how you're going to get to the other end, so how you can see out another month or 2 months or whatever of this, just go back one step and say, well, what's important now? what's the one thing I could be doing now? What could I do today? So you don't have to worry about what's happening in a month's time. And Alyssa most certainly had an experience like that on her first Everest climb on summit day, if you'd want to talk to that as well.
Yeah, well, I think there's always at least 2 points on every major expedition where you absolutely hit the wall, and no matter how much you want it, you just start seriously questioning what you're doing here and if you can actually do it. So I had an experience climbing I was on a summit push, so had been on Everest for 6 weeks, done all the rotations and acclimatization, and this was the final push. So we were now spending the next few days aiming for the summit. We had climbed from base camp up to Camp 2, so we were nearing Camp 2, halfway up the mountain. And it's a big morning, so we'd climbed through one of the most dangerous sections, the Khumbu Icefall, which is a lot of crevasses and ladders and high avalanche risk. So we left at 2 o'clock in the morning. We'd had a few sort of near misses with potential big avalanches. And we were on our way to Camp 2, and I remember I just had nothing left. Like, I felt like I had no energy. I genuinely didn't know how I was going to get through the next hour, and Camp 4 was probably 4 hours away. So that's when I had to really reduce everything back to just get through the next 10 steps. Just focus on that. Don't look ahead. Don't look at the summit. And just focus on what you're doing right now, because it's going to take every ounce of energy you've got. And so you can't be focused on anything else. You can't be thinking about anything else. You've just got to reduce your world to what's in my control, and pushing forward. So yeah, it was literally counting out 10 steps at a time and then stopping to take a couple breaths, and then I'd go again, and that would take all of the energy that I had.
Yeah, so we call that, focusing on the win. What's important now? And I think that's one of the biggest things you could take out of our stories, and anyone that we've ever dealt with that's been successful at anything. They've just been able to focus on, I can't solve all the problems, but what's important now? What can I do? What's the next step? And then just take that step, because activity is contagious. Once you start moving, you'll start to see what the next step will be and what the next step will be. And before you know it, you're 10 more steps advanced on where you were before, and you're slowly making it to that point. Once Alyssa got to Camp 2, she rang me the next day on a rest day. Sounded totally different. She rang on a sat phone and never had another blip on the way to the summit. In fact, you once said to me that the actual summit day itself was easier than it was still hard, but easier than you had expected it to be by that point.
The next 2 days after that were far easier for me than that particular day. So I think it's definitely a mental thing. It's the grind of feeling like that particular section is actually not one of the steepest, but it's the longest distance, and you feel like you're not getting any closer. So it's a complete mind game where you have to just focus on what you're doing.
Yeah. Now, there's so much we could talk to you guys about, but we don't want to sort of spend too much time on that. We just want to make this short and sharp. So the last thing I want to talk about is reaching out to people. When you're really struggling, have the ability to reach out to someone, have a go-to, have someone that you can talk to. I know on Alyssa's first climb, she rang me once on that day, but for the rest of the time, she was largely just sending a text here and there. And I know on your second summit, you rang Keith, who's a good mentor of hers, and just had a chat. And that's the ability that we don't have such big egos that we're scared to reach out to people who we trust, who we believe in, who we know believe in us. We're not looking for sympathy. We're not looking for people to pat us on the back and tell us it's okay. We're just looking for people that we can talk to. And through those processes, you'll slowly find what the answer is. Like when you rang me and when you rang Keith, you weren't looking for answers. You just needed to bounce off how you were feeling about something and how tough it was going. We have a bit of a chat, and then you just keep going. And I think in business you could do that as well. So, but you had that certainly on a couple of climbs, and that's a really important piece. All right, team, we'll sign off there. Thanks for having us again on the SAMP Network. It is really good to be involved in an organisation like this, purely because it is a chance for like-minded people to reach out and lean on each other. Hopefully once the dust settles and the air clears, we can all get back overseas, get travelling, get life back to somewhat of a normalcy, and hopefully we might be able to take you guys on an adventure somewhere, who knows.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, guys.